Hello and welcome to Combat COVID-19 Community Support. We are so glad that you've joined us this afternoon. We have a wonderful guest speaker, Jackie Taylor from Rimrock Trails Treatment Services, and she's going to be talking all about how to talk to your kids about COVID and help them through loss. But before we get started today, just a little bit about us. My name is Dawn Creech, and I'm leading up the Combat COVID support effort in partnership with a number of healthcare providers and leaders in our community. And we're really focused on bringing you these live events on how to care for you and your family's health during the pandemic. And we're funded by the Central Oregon Health Council. So we're going to dive right in to the content, but really quickly, we want to let you know that this event is provided for educational purposes only. It's not offered as medical advice or medical opinions. If you do have a medical or mental health concern, please talk to your healthcare provider. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jackie. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, we definitely want to hear from you. You're going to have a lot of opportunity to be part of the conversation today and get your questions answered. So be prepared to type your comments in the chat box. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Dawn. So, like Dawn said, we are going to give you the opportunity to participate today. We're going to start that right off the bat. So we're talking about talking to your kids about COVID-19. And I would really like to know before we get started, how many of you have? So I'm going to ask you to use your chat box and just answer, yes, I have, no, I haven't, or I have no idea what to say. So let's take a couple, maybe 30 seconds and see if we can get some answers.
Jackie, we don't have any votes yet from folks joining us online. They may need a few minutes to get their votes in, so maybe we could move on and then come back to that.
Absolutely, yes. So yeah, we'll just jump right in. For those of you that have talked to your children already and you're joining us, this is a great opportunity to check back in. For those of you that haven't or don't know what to say, this is also a great opportunity to learn how to structure that conversation. So there's a little bit for everyone here anyway. So we're going to start off right there with a great quote that kind of gets us started into why we want to talk to our children about COVID-19, why it's so important. Rachel Emke came up with this great quote. It says, kids worry more when they're kept in the dark. Kids worry more when they don't have the information. And we want to make sure that as their parents and as their providers, we're giving them that information. So how do we do that? Well, it all starts with self-care. Self-care for you, self-care for your family. And I'm not talking about going and putting on a face mask or anything like that. I'm talking about how are you taking care of your mental health and how are you going to keep yourself calm during this conversation. Then we want to make sure that once we're calm and our anxiety is reduced, we're reducing that fear and anxiety in our children. Next, we want to talk about facts and give the correct information. If we're going to be keeping our children out of the dark and into the light, they need to know what is really going on. It's important that it's a two-way conversation, and so we're going to invite questions and we're going to ask our children to be a part of the conversation instead of just making it into a lecture. Kind of like this is going to be a little bit today. You guys will have that opportunity to ask questions and be a part of the conversation too. And then, of course, we want to be reassuring. We want to make sure that our kids know that they're loved and know that they are safe. And finally, like I said, it's important to keep the conversation going. This isn't going to be a one-time conversation. We're going to keep checking back in with our children. So let's start off with self-care. I don't know if you guys were watching the humor video the other day, but it is important to use humor in this time. And so I gave this little gift of putting your mask on first. Taking care of yourself before you're able to take care of anybody else is really going to help with this conversation. And we want to make sure that we're not thinking of it as being selfish and we're kind of taking the pressure off ourselves a little bit. So for those of you out there who have been feeling a little bit of extra stress, maybe finding themselves being a little bit more snippy, not really feeling themselves, let's talk about how to reframe that. Is that really who you are, or are you having unmet needs during this difficult time? Are you taking opportunities for yourself to rest and to relax? Are you recharging your batteries? Are you taking opportunities to get mental stimulation or feel like you're in control? Do you have enough food and water? Are you taking care of those physiological needs? Are you hydrating enough? Are you eating good foods during this time? It's so easy to just fall back into bad habits when you're just at home all of the time. So make sure that you're taking opportunities to meet those needs. And then, of course, like I said, self-care. Not going to be going and putting on a face mask or going to get your nails done, which, of course, if that works for you, great. But for those moms or those parents or caregivers who that doesn't work for, let's talk about some other ways to do that. For me, one of the things that helps with self-care is that I wake up a little bit earlier than my child, and I make sure that I get a hot cup of coffee. Because sometimes when they're awake and I don't do that, I end up forgetting about the coffee, and it's in the microwave, and it's just not good. So taking care of myself means a hot cup of coffee. For other people, that could mean getting into an outfit, getting dressed out of those sweatpants, making yourself feel good, or disconnecting from social media and giving yourself a break from all of the massive amount of information that you're taking in right now. Once you've done that and you feel like you're in a place where you can be calm and keep out those negative emotions, we're going to go right into talking to our kids. So I want you to remember, this is important. It's important because kids worry more when they're kept in the dark. A lot of the times our children, when they're not given the right information or any information at all, will start taking what they've heard or what they've seen or the little bit that they do know, and they'll build their own storylines. For those children who are experiencing stress and experiencing increase in anxiety, often those storylines can turn into the worst possible outcome. And so we want to make sure that we're reducing that fear by giving them their information and by having this conversation. And then, when we're taking care of ourselves and while we're having this conversation, it's important to remember that our child is going to react, or our children are going to react in the same way they see the people they look up to reacting. If you are being calm and you're collected and you feel like you're in a good place, your child will see that and they will react very similarly. Let's talk about facts now. Facts really do make all the difference. Right now, there's a lot of information floating around. And we want to make sure that the information our children are getting is correct and from reputable sources. It's okay to talk to your children about how some of those sources out there are not great sources. They're not always giving true information. There's some really good resources out there like the CDC website or OHA. They have a COVID-19 specific page that gives very good information specifically to Oregon and answer a lot of those questions that they might have or that you might have. It might be a good idea right now to reduce their screen time. Like I said, a lot of misinformation, a lot of information coming at them all at once, and that can cause an increase in anxiety. So reducing their access to the news or to social media outlets, being aware if they're around you in the room when you're listening to those things can really help with where they're getting their information and then also with how much information they're getting.
Hi, Jackie. I'm so sorry to interrupt for just a moment. We are having some audio issues that appear to be from Zoom on your end. So I was actually wondering if we might be able to pause for a moment and have you rejoin the Zoom meeting, and then the audio, that might fix the audio. Would you be willing to give that a try?
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
Let me just leave the meeting. All right, sorry for that interruption, guys. My computer audio is not always the best, but we're trying, right? Best we can do. All right, so let's just move right along. We just talked about reducing screen time and making sure that what information we're giving to our children is based in fact. The other part of that is that we want to avoid any emotional input or placing blame for the virus. This is a virus that can affect anyone, just like any other virus. And so reducing that stigma and trying to avoid that placing of blame so that our child isn't also going along with that. Along those lines, be age appropriate in your information. If you're getting something from a website that might be great for a teenager, awesome. Might not be so great for a 3-year-old. Use other resources and use facts and information that they can understand and take in. You're just talking at them, you're giving them too much information all at once. It can actually increase their anxiety even more. So try and be age appropriate. Even with multiple children, that could be really helpful. And then finally, take that pressure off of yourself to know everything. Yes, facts are important, but you may not know all of them, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine to tell your child, I don't know, but I'll find out. And then, of course, go and find out and circle back to the conversation so that they know that they can trust you to give them information as well. And once you have done all of this, it's time to invite them into the conversation. Ask your child what they know. What have they heard? If you haven't been reducing screen time or if you've been having these conversations with them, make sure that you're getting the information that they know so that in case there is misinformation, you can correct it. Try not to ask them too many questions during this conversation because if they don't know something, it might be harder for them to communicate that, and then that can increase their anxiety. Also, try not to overload them with too much information with your questions so that they can feel successful and confident in what they know during this conversation. Of course, be reassuring. All feelings are okay. If they're sad, if they're angry, if they're scared, all of that is okay. This is how they experience what's going on. So be reassuring. Let them know that maybe you're feeling a little bit sad too, that it's okay that they miss their friends, that this is a really hard time for them. It's all right. Just validate those feelings and let them know it's okay to feel them. If you can, and if it's true for your family, let them know that you guys are fine, that they're fine. Children can be very egocentric, so they need to hear that they're going to be okay and that the people that they love and care about are going to be okay as well. One way to do that is to really focus on what you guys are doing to keep them safe. So washing your hands more often, doing that happy birthday song for 20 seconds or singing it twice. In my house, we like to make that a little bit more fun, and we sing happy birthday to different objects in the bathroom so that my child doesn't get bored with it and he knows that it's important and he's having fun. Teaching them things like sneezing into your elbow or into a tissue and then throwing that tissue away, that can be really helpful. Having them know that wearing masks in public, if that's something that you guys are doing, let them know why and why that's important. And then also staying away from people who are sick or staying home if they're feeling sick to protect other people. Always to focus on what you guys are doing to keep you and your family safe. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're keeping the conversation going. Just like COVID-19, just like every single day, there's new information, and this can't just be a one and done conversation. Remember, even though your child's not talking about it, doesn't mean they're not experiencing emotions related to it. So check back in every couple days, let them know when you found out good information, and just keep up with them. And then for those of you who are still a little on the fence as to whether or not your child maybe needs to have this conversation, here's a little bit more information on anxiety and how it presents in our children. One of the things that I definitely would look for is anger. When a child is feeling anxious or out of control, they're in that fight or flight state. And so they don't have a way to communicate that all the time, and that can present as anger. Same kind of thing with defiance. If you've noticed your child is a little bit more defiant these days, they're trying to control their environment. They may not be trying to make us angry or to be a defiant child, but they're just finding some way to control what they're experiencing when they don't have the words to put it into place. Also look for changes in their sleep patterns or their eating patterns. If they're having difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep, having nightmares in the middle of the night, those all are signs of anxiety. And then, avoidance, lack of focus, those can also be hallmark signs of anxiety during this time, especially surrounding schoolwork and having to pick up on something that they've never done before, which is this online learning that our kids are doing right now. Of course, we don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. So if you're not able to have this conversation, or if you want a few more tools to do so, here's a list of resources. And I believe that Dawn is putting them into the chat box so that you guys can have them for yourselves. The CNN town hall with Sesame Street on COVID-19, it's about an hour and a half. It's pretty lengthy. They do break it up into different clips if you search for it on YouTube. And it goes over everything from hand washing to why we have to stay inside. And it's a really great child-friendly resource to use to have this conversation. In my house, in my practice, we use a lot of Julia Cook books. And when this pandemic started, Julia Cook came out with a book called The Yucky Bug, which is not actually a book, it's on YouTube, and she had children illustrate and read it, so it's very kid-friendly and relatable. And then, of course, there's other books such as The Oyster and the Pearl by Ana Gomez, and The Germ That Wears a Crown by Javier Rosario and Tatiana Fernandez. Both very good resources. They're very kid-friendly. The Germ That Wears a Crown is a little bit older, so just be aware of that. It's not teen, quite old, but a little bit older kids, or later elementary, I would say. And then finally, The Invisible String by Patrice Karst is not actually COVID-19 specific. It's more about building those connections and maintaining those connections when children are experiencing loss of connection. It's a beautifully done book. There's many readings of it on YouTube that you can look up, and you can also purchase it on Amazon. Okay, so now that we've talked about how kids are experiencing or talking with children about COVID-19, let's talk a little bit more about what they're experiencing and maybe why it's so important to have these conversations with them. Right now, there's been a lot of loss of school for our adolescents, loss of experiences, prom, graduation for our seniors, camps or after school programs for our younger kids. These things can all be translated into grief and loss for our kids. So it's important that we recognize that and we understand it and we address it with them. So to understand grief, in children, it's a little bit different. It's not that perfectly linear Kubler-Ross model of, denial and anger, bargaining and depression, and then finally acceptance. It's not perfectly linear. Children can experience any emotion, any of these stages at any given time. A child can be thinking, this isn't happening to me, and skip all the way to, all right, we're doing this. What do we need to do to keep ourselves safe? And go right back to, this isn't fair. I'm not going to be dealing with this. Just expect that your child is not going to be experiencing grief in a linear motion. A child can be perfectly fine in playing one day or 1 minute and then flying off the handle the next. That's perfectly normal for a child. And then also for those of us who have younger kids, they don't always have words to express how they're feeling, and it can come out in play. So something to be aware of if you do see those themes coming up, let them play it out. and engage with them. And then, of course, we want to talk about some feelings that the kids might be exhibiting. This is not an extensive list by any means. There's only 4 emotions right here, but they are some common ones that we'll see. So, of course, sadness. We're talking about loss. There's going to be some sadness, also some confusion, anger, especially when they don't have the words or they've lost something very important to them, including their routine, and then also some worry. There's no known end to this. And so there might be some worry into when everything's going to go back to the way it was, or if it's going to go back to the way it was. Of course, with feelings, there comes behaviors. And just like when we talked about anxiety, there's some very similar behaviors. There might be some withdrawal, not wanting to interact with family, not wanting to participate in school, some acting out, throwing more fits than usual. Again, sleep disturbances, not being able to fall asleep, stay asleep, changes in eating. Maybe they're not hungry, or they're eating a lot, or they're only eating comfort foods, foods that make them feel safe. Again, poor concentration. And of course, being overly clingy. Your kids are home with you all the time now, and so you might be noticing a little bit more that they're being overly clingy, but that may be their way of communicating that they're not getting their needs met, and they're worried, and they're grieving this loss and this change. Some children might experience some regression. So just something to note, if you feel like you've moved past something in a developmental stage, and then all of a sudden your child is experiencing it again, that might be a sign that they're experiencing this grief and this loss, and it's time to have a conversation. So how do we open that conversation? What do we do for them? Well, first off, it's important to recognize again that just because your child is not talking about their loss or their grieving process doesn't mean they're not feeling or thinking about it. Encourage your child to express their feelings and to ask questions. Go to them. Don't expect them to come to you. Let them know that all feelings are okay. No matter what they're feeling, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Be honest and open about loss. Be careful not to overload them with too much information. Again, that can increase anxiety, but make sure you're being open about it. If you have lost somebody, or if there has been death or dying, be very concrete in what you're saying. Try not to use euphemisms. They did not go to sleep. They passed away. Just try and be very concrete so that they actually have an understanding. This is kind of the time to ramp up that compassion, which some of us might be feeling a little bit fatigued with right now, especially being home with our children all of the time. But try and show some extra affection. Try and, give them an extra smile, or snuggle them at night. Give plenty of hugs. Tell them I love you. Tell them you're proud of them. Anything that shows them affection. If your family is not a touching family, that's okay. You can do it with words or with actions, but just really try and amp that up a little bit. And then, of course, you've probably all seen on Facebook or on other social media sites all those great color-coded schedules that parents have made because they're super excited about being home and they're going to keep everything in routine. And some of you are probably laughing at that right now because it's not always a reality for your family. But whatever routine your family has, be consistent with it. Let your child know what to expect from day to day, especially right now when there's so much out there that they can't control. They can and will know what's going on in their home. The National Alliance for Grieving Children came out with some great resources that I highly recommend you guys check out. This is just a couple of them. One is for children and one is for teens, although a lot of it is the same. Some ideas for helping children through their grief and through their loss. Ideas like moving their bodies, wiggling, dancing, freeze dancing, if you're anything like my child who loves freeze dance. Getting creative, journaling, drawing, anything like that. Listening to music can be really helpful. Taking a moment to sit and breathe. For younger children, that might look like coloring or doing an art project. For older children, that could be journaling or just sitting and experiencing the world around them. And then also for teens, especially, it's important to help them identify their strengths and help them identify their supports. If that is you, if that is their caregivers, great. If that is not able to be a strong support for them, encourage them to reach out for help. And then again, some more resources. Tear Soup by Pat Schreiber and Chuck Declan is a beautifully drawn book about a woman who has experienced a great loss in her life. It does not actually specify what the loss is, but does go through the experience and how she dealt with it. Lifetimes is a little bit more on the side of death and dying and the life cycle. Again, beautifully drawn, very well thought out, and very easy for younger children to understand. A Flicker of Hope by Julia Cook is about reaching out to supports when you're feeling grief or feeling loss. Sometimes you just can't deal with it on your own, and that's okay. And so reaching out so that you don't let your hope and your light go out is really important. Probably my favorite on this list is the movie Wonder Park, which I recently watched. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's about a young girl who experiences some loss in her family. And it goes through how she manages her grief, manages her anxiety. What I really like about it is that at the end of the movie, it returns to what her normal is. And so you get to see kind of the whole cycle. And then, of course, there's some online resources that are really, really great, recommended by OHA. And one of them is the Good Grief site, which has a lot of amazing resources on building resilience in children and families. The National Association of Independent Schools came up with a very extensive list of resources for grief and loss. Lot of different books, a lot of different websites that you can look at. And the Harvard Business Journal published an article about the 6th stage of grief. And it talks a lot about anticipatory grief, which is a lot of what we're experiencing right now. So I highly recommend checking that out as well. And that's really it. I wanted to leave you guys with a quote from the late, great Fred Rogers, which if you're a Pittsburgh girl like me, you know how important and how amazing he was. So if you guys want to check this quote out, it's only natural that we and our children find many things that are hard to talk about, but anything human is mentionable, anything mentionable is manageable. The mentioning can be difficult and the managing can be too, but both can be done if we're surrounded by love and trust. And that's it.
Great. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, and thanks for sticking with us, working through the audio issues. When you dialed back in, it did seem to fix it. So it sounded great. So we have a couple comments from our audience members, going back to when you were talking about kind of that list of things that kids can experience in going through COVID. One of our audience members, Linda, commented, adults are experiencing those things too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it was probably ringing true for that audience member. And also Katie commented, killing it, Jackie. And also, I think a couple of our audience members were really appreciative of the books, and I was able to share those with direct links into the comments as you were talking. So, you know, as you were talking about all this, I was actually thinking about a live event we did last night here on Combat COVID-19 Community Support. And one of our audience members was talking about their 13-year-old son who was really avoiding mom when mom would come home from work. Now, mom is an essential worker and works at a hospital directly with COVID patients. So when she comes home, she has to go through a whole process to, you know, shower and, you know, make sure that she's not bringing anything home. And so the particular 13-year-old boy started having some avoidance behaviors around that. And I was wondering if you had thoughts on, what's going on with that kid and what that parent could do in that particular situation.
Well, without knowing the kid, I don't want to give too much advice because I don't know this child and I don't know what they're experiencing. But it might be helpful to go back to focusing on what the mom is doing to keep her and her family safe, to make sure that the child is safe. And going over those steps and what she's doing, that showering and whatever else she's doing to keep them safe.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for that information. Okay, so I am going to do one last call for our folks joining us on Facebook or YouTube. If you have any questions for Jackie, now's your time to get those answered. So please just type into the chat box. We did have a comment from one of our viewers that said, "Fabulous, Jackie." And we'll just give folks a minute longer. Maybe actually while we're waiting, one thing I was interested in is if you could talk a little bit about the services that are available at Rimrock Trails Treatment Services where you work for children and their families. Like, what does that look like right now? Are there services available? Are you open to seeing new clients right now?
Yes, we are still open. As soon as everything shut down, we rolled right into telehealth. And so sessions just like what we're doing now, except more active, of course, are available, and we are taking new clients in the Bend, Redmond, and Prineville offices. So just give us a call if you want to schedule an appointment.
Great. And I'll go ahead and put your website in the comments for our viewers. Are you doing telehealth and in person, or how does that work?
At the moment, we're just doing telehealth. We're hoping that we'll be able to do more in-person sessions as the restrictions are lifted, but right now it's just telehealth.
Okay, excellent. Well, with that, I'm not seeing any more questions come in from our audience members. So I want to thank you, Jackie, for taking time to be here today. And I do want to remind our audience that we have another live event coming at you tomorrow at noon. We have a wonderful guest speaker who's going to be talking about mindfulness skills to help with managing anxiety and uncertainty during COVID. So join us for that over your lunch hour. And then also please go to our Facebook page to see the schedule of upcoming events. I'm so excited. Next week, we have our first live event in Spanish. For any Spanish-speaking families out there, it's going to be all about kids and COVID. So please join us for that as well. And again, thank you for being here, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.